In every dictatorship, there is a man who holds the microphone. Not the one who commands the armies, but the one who commands the minds. In Nazi Germany, that man was Joseph Goebbels, a failed novelist who never fired a shot in battle. Yet with nothing but words, images, and emotion, he sold a nation on hatred, war, and blind devotion. This is the story of how Joseph Goebbels became Hitler's greatest salesman. Paul Joseph Goebbels was born on October 29, 1897, in the small industrial town of Reit, near Dusseldorf. His father worked as a clerk in a factory. His mother, deeply Catholic, raised 5 children in a strict but loving household. From birth, Joseph carried a burden that would shape his entire life. He was born with a club foot, caused by a bone defect that left one leg shorter than the other. Despite surgery, he walked with a permanent limp. He was short, frail, and often sick, plagued by lung infections that kept him indoors while other boys played. In a society that prized toughness and discipline, he felt humiliated. Classmates mocked him. He felt excluded, different. That sense of weakness planted something dangerous inside him, a burning need to prove his worth. If he could not be strong, he would be important. If he could not be admired for his body, he would be admired for his mind. Books became his refuge. He devoured poetry, novels, philosophy, and history. Even as a boy, he dreamed of becoming a great writer. When World War I erupted in 1914, Germany was swept up in patriotic fever. Young men rushed to enlist. Joseph Goebbels wanted to join them, but the army doctors rejected him, unfit for service. While millions of Germans marched off to the front, Goebbels stayed behind. That rejection cut deep. Germany's defeat in 1918, the humiliation of the Treaty of Versailles, the collapse of the empire, all of it blended with his personal sense of failure. He had not fought, he had not bled, he had not belonged. In his later writings, that sense of exclusion hardened into resentment toward the world, toward the victors, and toward anyone he believed had stolen Germany's destiny. After the war, Goebbels threw himself into education. He studied literature, history, and philosophy at several German universities, Bonn, Würzburg, Freiburg, Munich, before finally earning a doctorate in philosophy from the University of Heidelberg in 1921. His dissertation focused on romantic drama, not politics. He imagined himself as a poet-philosopher, a cultural leader who would guide Germany's spiritual rebirth. But post-war Germany had little use for such dreams. He wrote novels and plays. They were rejected. He sent manuscripts to publishers across Germany. Most never replied. Instead, Goebbels drifted between dead-end jobs, tutoring, clerical work, minor journalism, barely surviving. He lived in poverty, filling diary after diary with frustration, self-pity, and growing resentment. Germany in the early 1920s was a nation in chaos. Hyperinflation wiped out savings. Political violence filled the streets. The young democracy looked weak and fragile. Like many disillusioned Germans, Goebbels began searching for someone to blame. He turned against democracy, against elites, against intellectuals who had succeeded where he had failed, and increasingly against Jews. He began reading anti-Semitic pamphlets and conspiracy theories, convincing himself that Germany had been betrayed from within. In his diaries, his tone grew darker, more hateful. He felt wronged by life, and he wanted revenge. But more than anything, he wanted meaning, someone to follow, something to believe in. In 1924, Joseph Goebbels joined the small and still fringe Nazi party. Then he heard Adolf Hitler speak, and over time, it changed everything. Hitler's speeches were not logical arguments. They were emotional performances, rage, hope, destiny, humiliation, and redemption, all woven together. Goebbels was transfixed. In his diary, he wrote that Hitler was a genius, a man of destiny, even a kind of savior who could redeem Germany. For the first time, Goebbels felt he had found the figure he had been searching for. He didn't just admire Hitler, he believed in him. From that moment on, Goebbels surrendered his own ambitions to a new goal, to make Adolf Hitler the leader of Germany, and to be the man who would sell him to the world. Goebbels quickly rose within the Nazi party, becoming Gauleiter of Berlin, the party's leader in the capital. Berlin was hostile territory for the Nazis, a stronghold of communists, socialists, and liberals. For Goebbels, it became a laboratory. He organized marches through enemy neighborhoods. He encouraged provocations that sparked street fights. He plastered walls with posters and slogans. He launched party newspapers filled with outrage and insults. Goebbels learned something vital. Politics was not about convincing minds. It was about stirring emotions. He staged rallies like theatrical performances, torches, banners, music, chants. He wanted people to feel Nazism, not just hear it. He was learning how to turn crowds into believers. And Hitler noticed. Hitler saw in Goebbels something rare, a man who could translate his vision into emotion. Goebbels was intelligent, quick-witted, and fanatically loyal. He could write, speak, and organize. He understood how to provoke attention and dominate headlines. The two men formed a powerful bond. Goebbels worshipped Hitler. Hitler valued Goebbels' talent. By the early 1930s, as Nazi support surged, Goebbels had become one of Hitler's closest lieutenants. When political chaos finally brought Hitler to power as Chancellor in January 1933, he soon rewarded Goebbels with a position tailor-made for him, Reich Minister of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda. The failed novelist had become the master of Germany's message. Goebbels' task was not simply to censor critics, he was to create a myth, not Adolf Hitler the politician, but Adolf Hitler the symbol, the Führer as the humble soldier of World War I, the tireless worker who lived only for Germany, and the man chosen by destiny to restore national pride. Every official photograph was staged, every public appearance carefully choreographed, every speech framed to sound historic. Radio carried Hitler's voice into millions of homes. Newspapers repeated his words. Posters showed him as calm, strong, almost timeless. Goebbels understood something revolutionary. People do not follow policies, they follow stories. And he made Hitler the hero of Germany's story. As Goebbels built the Führer myth, he worked to align the public image of Hitler's growing inner circle, each man playing a role in the grand narrative. Hermann Göring, the flamboyant World War I ace, symbol of military glory and national strength. Heinrich Himmler, the quiet, obsessive architect of the SS, portrayed as the guardian of racial purity and order. Rudolf Hess, the devoted deputy, embodiment of blind loyalty. Reinhard Heydrich, the sharp, ruthless intelligence chief, feared but carefully shielded from public scrutiny. Albert Speer, the young architect, marketed as the genius builder of a new Germany. Martin Bormann, the shadowy gatekeeper who controlled access to Hitler himself. Goebbels turned them into characters in a national drama. But always, at the center of every image, every story, every headline, stood Adolf Hitler. As Reich Minister of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda, Goebbels moved with astonishing speed. Within weeks, his ministry took control of newspapers and press agencies, radio broadcasting, publishing houses, theatre and music, art exhibitions, and above all, film. Every editor received daily instructions. Every major radio station followed centralized scripts. Journalists were told what to print and what to ignore. Goebbels didn't just censor, he replaced reality. Germany would no longer see the world as it was, but as Goebbels wanted it to be. He once argued that propaganda must not be objective, but must lead the masses where they are meant to go. On May 10, 1933, Goebbels seized on one of the regime's first great spectacles and turned it into a national event. In Berlin's central square, thousands of students and stormtroopers gathered at night, torches in hand. They threw tens of thousands of books into roaring flames, works by Jewish authors, liberals, pacifists, and critics of Nazism. Goebbels stood before the crowd, delivering an incendiary speech. He declared that Germany was cleansing itself of un-German ideas. It was not just censorship, but a public declaration that free thought was over, and the regime now claimed ownership of the German mind. Newsreels of the event were shown in cinemas across the country, ensuring millions more would witness the message. The new Germany tolerated no dissent. Goebbels built his propaganda into a vast empire of control. He centralized news agencies so every newspaper carried the same official stories. He flooded the country with cheap radios, the people's receiver, so even poor families could hear Hitler's speeches. Soon Hitler's voice was everywhere, in homes, in cafes, in factories, and on street loudspeakers. Goebbels knew propaganda needed heroes besides Hitler. One of his most important public partners, and rivals, was Hermann Göring. Göring was everything Goebbels was not. Tall, flamboyant, decorated war hero from World War I. He loved luxury, uniforms, and grand gestures. Goebbels promoted Göring as the symbol of German strength, the fearless leader of the Luftwaffe, the man who would defend the Reich from any enemy. Whenever Göring promised miracle weapons or total air superiority, Goebbels amplified it. Even as Göring's corruption grew and his failures mounted, propaganda kept his image polished. If Göring represented glory, Heinrich Himmler represented discipline. Himmler was the architect of the SS, an elite force built on racial ideology and blind obedience. Quiet, obsessive, and fanatically devoted, he created a state within a state. Goebbels understood Himmler's value. Through newspapers, posters, and films, he helped portray the SS as noble guardians of Germany, men of honor, order, and sacrifice. The darker reality was hidden. Working in tandem with Himmler's ruthless deputy Reinhard Heydrich, who ran the security services and intelligence networks, Goebbels helped justify arrests, camps, and terror as necessary protection against enemies of the state. Propaganda framed fear as virtue. To be watched meant to be safe. To obey meant to belong. Where Goebbels shaped belief, Himmler and Heydrich enforced it. Another crucial figure in Goebbels' world was Martin Bormann. Unlike Göring or Himmler, Bormann rarely appeared in public. As head of the Nazi Party Chancellery and later Hitler's private secretary, he controlled who saw the Führer and what information reached him. Goebbels had to navigate Bormann carefully. He flattered him, worked around him, sometimes clashed with him. But he understood one thing. To shape Germany, he had to shape Hitler's world. And Bormann stood at the door. The two men competed quietly for influence. Goebbels in public, Bormann in private, both bound by total loyalty to Hitler. Of all media, film obsessed Goebbels the most. He believed cinema could do what speeches could not, make people feel before they thought. He imposed personal control over Germany's great film studio, UFA, expelling Jewish artists and forcing loyalty oaths. Actors who resisted were ruined. Directors who questioned orders vanished from credits. Goebbels demanded films that entertained while subtly shaping attitudes. Love stories, historical epics, comedies, all infused with messages of loyalty, sacrifice, and destiny. And then there were the overt propaganda films. One of the most dangerous was I Accuse from 1941, which portrayed euthanasia as a compassionate act. Audiences wept, debated, and many accepted the logic. At the same time, the euthanasia program Action T4 expanded, killing tens of thousands of disabled people, and the film helped legitimize it. Another was The Eternal Jew, a grotesque documentary portraying Jews as parasites and criminals, images staged and edited to inflame hatred. Cinema blurred fiction and reality, and millions absorbed it without realizing. Antisemitism became the central pillar of Goebbels' message. He flooded newspapers with stories blaming Jews for economic hardship, moral decay, political unrest. Every crisis had the same culprit. Working closely with Himmler and Heydrich, Goebbels ensured propaganda prepared the public for what the SS was already carrying out, and what it would soon escalate. When Jewish businesses were attacked, when laws stripped Jews of rights, when synagogues burned during Kristallnacht in 1938, Goebbels helped incite it and then presented it as spontaneous public anger. The truth was far darker. Hatred had been carefully sold. As rallies grew larger and more elaborate, Goebbels found another key ally, Albert Speer. Speer designed monumental architecture and vast rally grounds that turned Nazi gatherings into overwhelming spectacles. Towering columns, endless rows of banners, and hundreds of thousands of spectators. Goebbels filled those spaces with choreography, music, torches, chants, perfectly timed speeches. Together, under Hitler's direction, Speer and Goebbels transformed politics into religious experience. People didn't just attend rallies, they felt absorbed into something larger than themselves. While preaching discipline and sacrifice, Goebbels lived very differently. He surrounded himself with luxury. He pursued actresses relentlessly. He used his power to threaten careers. Yet publicly, he and his wife Magda remained the image of the perfect Nazi family. 6 blonde children, smiling portraits. The lie extended even into his own life. And like all lies, it demanded constant maintenance. When his affair with Lida Barova nearly cost him everything, Hitler intervened. and forced him back into line. From that moment on, Goebbels became even more fanatically loyal. By the late 1930s, Germany was marching toward war. Goebbels framed every move as defensive. Germany was surrounded, Germany was threatened, Germany had no choice. When war broke out in 1939, he promised swift victory. When Germany invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, he sold it as a crusade against Jewish Bolshevism. By 1942, the empire Joseph Goebbels had spent a decade selling to the German people was beginning to crack. The victories he promised were slowing. The enemies he mocked were pushing back. And the war he had framed as destiny was turning into a struggle for survival. But for Goebbels, there could be no turning back. At first, the war had gone exactly as Goebbels promised. Poland fell, France collapsed, German troops marched through Europe, newspapers proclaimed triumph, radio announced destiny fulfilled. But in the vast East, Germany met something different. The Soviet Union did not collapse. By late 1941, German armies were stalled outside Moscow. The winter froze men and machines alike. Casualty lists grew longer. Goebbels could not hide the losses forever. Families began receiving death notices. Factories felt the absence of workers. Cities felt the strain of war. The salesman faced a problem. How do you sell victory when the promise of it is slipping away? Goebbels responded the only way he knew how. He changed the story. Defeats became temporary setbacks. Retreats became strategic withdrawals. Losses were blamed on weather, traitors, or overwhelming numbers. He insisted Germany was still strong. Then came Stalingrad. In the winter of 1942 to 43, an entire German army was encircled and destroyed by Soviet forces. Tens of thousands were killed or captured. It was a catastrophe unlike anything Germany had seen. Goebbels knew the truth could no longer be concealed, but instead of admitting defeat, he chose escalation. On February 18, 1943, Goebbels took the stage at Berlin's Sportpalast before a carefully selected crowd. The hall was packed. Banners draped the walls. Microphones carried his voice across Germany. His speech built slowly, acknowledging hardship, invoking sacrifice, blaming enemies. Then he roared the question that would define his legacy. Do you want total war? The crowd exploded. Yes, again and again he asked. Again and again they answered. Goebbels demanded longer working hours, fewer comforts, complete mobilization of men, women and youth, and absolute obedience to Hitler. The salesman was now selling sacrifice. He threw his weight behind Albert Speer's drive for full industrial mobilization. With Himmler's SS, forced labor and terror expanded. With Bormann's party machine, dissent was hunted down. By 1944, teenage boys of the Hitler Youth were given rifles and sent to the front. Elderly men were formed into the Volkssturm, a last-ditch militia. Goebbels praised them as heroes. He called on mothers to give their sons, on children to become soldiers, on civilians to fight in the streets. To Goebbels, every death that bought a few more days for the Reich was worth it. Even as Germany collapsed, rivalries in the Nazi leadership continued. Göring's influence faded as his Luftwaffe failed. Himmler schemed for post-war power and secret negotiations. Bormann tightened his grip on Hitler. Speer tried to save what industry remained. Goebbels watched them all, but he never wavered in his loyalty. He could not imagine a world without Hitler, or without the ideology he had spent his life selling. By early 1945, Soviet armies were closing in from the east. Allied forces advanced from the west. German cities lay in ruins. Still, Goebbels ordered newspapers to speak of final victory. In April 1945, Joseph Goebbels followed Adolf Hitler into the Führerbunker beneath Berlin. He brought with him his wife Magda and their 6 children. The salesman had gone to the last showroom. Above them, the city shook under artillery fire. Below, the regime's leaders whispered in collapsing corridors. Goebbels stayed close to Hitler to the end. On April 29, 1945, knowing the end was near, Hitler named Joseph Goebbels, Chancellor of Germany, in his political testament, his chosen successor. It was the final seal of trust. For Goebbels, it was everything he had wanted, but it would last barely a day. On April 30th, Hitler took his own life. The Führer was gone, and with him, the world Goebbels had built. On May 1st, 1945, in the bunker beneath Berlin, Joseph and Magda Goebbels made their final decision. They dressed their 6 children in clean clothes. They told them stories. They tried to keep them calm. Then, they poisoned them. 6 young lives ended in the name of an ideology. Afterward, Josef and Magda took their own lives. Goebbels never commanded armies. He never led charges into battle. Yet few men in history caused more destruction. He proved that a lie, repeated often enough, can begin to feel like truth. Emotion can overpower reason. And modern media can turn fantasy into reality. Different platforms today, same psychology. That is why Goebbels' story still matters.